Hello, everybody, and welcome to the start of a new week on the PHLY Eagles podcast. It is noon. I am Bo Wulf. That is Zach Berman. And for all we know, Nick Sirianni and Jeffrey Lurie are still locked in a room together. They haven't slept. They haven't showered. They're just staring at each other, grizzled, and they have been doing so for the past, 125 hours. Zach, what is going on? Is Nick Sirianni being held hostage in the NovaCare Complex?
You had me envious there until the no shower part, right? I don't mind the no sleep. I mean, I could spend 3 days with Jeffrey Lurie and Nick Sirianni. That sounded great. The no shower part, that's a bridge too far for me.
That you should pitch that as a story idea to them. How about a darkness retreat, Aaron Rodgers style, but it's you and Jeffrey in the same room for a full week?
That'd be a great book right there. Sign me up.
How cool, what do you think Jeffrey's thought process would be when that was brought to him as a possibility?
He would say, what did I do to deserve this?
Well, I mean, he would just say no, but he would be angry that the concept was even brought to him, that they were wasting his time. And maybe he'd be willing to bring you to St. Martin with him instead.
I'll take that. Okay. Sounds fun.
Well, Zach, there's a lot to get to. There is not the major news that we have been waiting for, but yesterday, on Sunday, a few little things starting to trickle out about some moves on the defensive coaching staff. We'll get to that. Today, some rumors or reports about people they are talking to. A recent report just before we went from Derek Gunn about Brian Johnson's potential future. Let's get to it all. We can talk a little bit about what happened in the games playoff-wise this weekend. But there is so much going on with the Eagles, and we still don't really know what's going on. We don't know when we're going to hear from the Eagles. Yeah. Let's start with this. Tell me, because you are the chapter president, right, for the PFWA. What are the rules here? When do the Eagles have to talk to us?
So the rules are that the coach and or personnel executive and or owner must talk in the week following the season ending, right? So, by the letter of the law,
we're deciding what the definition of a week is.
Yes, by the letter of the law, one would say that's today, tomorrow. Reasonably, you can apply a degree of flexibility if you think a decision, if you're late last week and they're meeting, you get it, right? There's things they need to figure out. When you're into this week here, it's
and by the letter of the law, who has to speak?
Well, the coach and or GM and or owner.
Okay, so one of those three at least.
One of those three, typically, you'd like more than one of those three.
Usually, it's head coach and GM.
And GM, right. Exactly. The owner, if the decision was made to fire somebody and thus he's being accountable for the decision. Typically, though, head coach, and in our time here, it's been the head coach and or GM. After the 2016 season, Howie was the only one who spoke. And that was curious because it kind of came off like, are they not sure of Doug here, right? In the years past, it's been Howie and the coach. They do it at the same time. I never really like that because it's the first time you're speaking to Howie in quite a long time. And you speak to the coach 3-4 times a week, right? 4 times a week. So at that point, there's typically more for Howie for those end of the season things. I would prefer if they were separate. Like the Cleveland Browns have Andrew Berry speaking today, for instance.
But then there's no opportunity for somebody to be in the background licking a water bottle.
Yeah, you have to be a sicko to understand that reference.
You have to be a sicko to do it.
Count on you for the quick one-liners. So I imagine we're going to hear from them in the coming days. There was the Monday night game last week, right? I'm not making excuses for them, but the calendar's been atypical. You're usually thinking the season ends on a Sunday. Here, they had a Monday night game. They get back late, or they get back early Monday morning. They didn't have their exit interviews until Wednesday. So, I mean, you could say Jeffrey's travel, but there's snow going on in the region. I would imagine something tomorrow would be the best, a reasonable scenario.
So let's talk about like why there has been such radio silence. Like we were talking before the show, and you pointed out like they didn't even announce on their website the list of futures contracts that they signed, which
is like the
have
most
already gone through the like transaction
Yep.
wire. Like just put it on the transactions. So it seems like there is an edict from the team right now for like full radio silence. There has not been an announcement of anybody returning or anything like that. Now, they're reporting yesterday about the Sean Desai firing, which was a little bit gross to me. But it was like everybody's parsing that Nick is the one who did it. Like, and by the way, I mean, poor Sean Desai. Like, he gets a call from Nick Sirianni. He's probably like finally taking some time with his family after this terrible year. And Nick's like, "Hey man, like I gotta let you go." And Desai's like, "Of course, like you didn't have to call me to do that. You already fired me. You don't have to fire me again."
I like the line at the top of your story. You want to repeat the joke?
Oh yeah, well yeah. No wonder they couldn't react to a blitz in full time. It took them a week to fire the guy they already fired.
Yeah. The last line there being most pertinent, right? They essentially fired.
Right.
It was.
Nick's like, "Hey, this is going to be a difficult conversation," and she's like, "What are you talking about?"
It was actually more laudable, if you will, that Desai stayed on for those final few weeks. As opposed, because it's almost, and we talked about this when they made the change. Like, why are you demoting
but if he
him?
quits, he doesn't get paid.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. So now finally they do this, but this can't be your move here, and it can't be Nick's really exerting his authority here by dismissing the guy that we already thought
decision making from Nick Sirianni to fire the guy he already fired. Meanwhile, the reporting of Patricia is, "Oh, well, you know, Matt was put in a really difficult situation having to call someone else's defense. His contract's up. He's thinking because he's going to be such a hot commodity, he might just sort of look for an opportunity elsewar."
Well, so
give me a break.
So there are semantics things here that are at play that's worth noting, and I pointed this out on a video that you can find on the PHLY page, and then
Beloved Matt
a story
Patricia,
on-
bless his soul.
No, so
out of the
so
kindness
Sean
of his
Desai-
heart,
so
ran
Sh-
the worst defense in the history of the NFL.
So Sean Desai was under contract, right? Yeah. So the Eagles can't commence a defensive coordinator search without opening the defensive coordinator job. They couldn't. It's not just in theory. In practice, they can't talk to people for a defensive coordinator job that isn't open. So there has to be a dismissal of Desai in order for that job to open. Whereas Patricia, they can just let his contract run out. And typically, the Eagles haven't announced dismissals of people who have expiring contracts. It's just like this person's going. So I understand the semantics thing there. It's more the packaging, and I imagine this came from Patricia's side of.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah,
he basically wrote the tweet himself.
Yeah, that he was really in this big imposition going up against the Giants twice and the Cardinals and Drew Lock, that he had this undermanned roster where really their roster wasn't depleted by injuries when they were actually healthier than the offensive side.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, he was running someone else's scheme, but in fairness, he was there to put the scheme together. It's not like they just picked Patricia off the street. Patricia was with the Eagles when Desai put everything in throughout training camp. So it might not be Patricia's scheme, but it's not as if like Patricia was just called into a different team. And then the third part of this is the notion that he's going to be this like highly pursued defensive coordinator. He's been available as a defensive coordinator the past 3 years. No one has hired him. He was as the D coordinator. He's been he had this 5-game sample size with the Eagles, which was disastrous. I'm not taking any, like, Patricia is a smart guy. He knows football. I'm not disputing that. But this idea that all of a sudden every defensive coordinator job is going to have Patricia at the top of their list, I find to be a bit far-fetched.
So all of that is to say, if it is the case that Sirianni is making these decisions and making these phone calls, why do you think it is? What are the possible explanations for why this thing is dragging on without any, reporting from national reporters, the usual suspects saying, Nick Sirianni will be back in Philadelphia and is working on building out his staff. Like, why has that not been disseminated?
So I can give you like what the team might say, and then the skeptical view of it.
Yeah, give me a couple explanations.
So what the team might say is you don't have to announce that your head coach is coming back the same way the Texans aren't announcing this morning that DeMeco Ryans is coming back.
This is going to be the gaslighting.
Yeah. He's our head coach. Why are we, we're not announcing Jalen Hurts is coming back as the quarterback, right? That could be their explanation for this. They didn't announce Sirianni was coming back last year, right? You announce when a move's made, not when someone's staying. Now, of course, we all know that if it was that simple, Sirianni would have talked the day after the game, right? And it would have been like business as usual for the
And
Eagles.
they wouldn't be letting him twist in the wind publicly. They would, Adam Schefter would say, yeah, Nick Sirianni is still the Eagles head coach and will be.
Sure. It wouldn't be a science point to this, right? So, yeah. So, but I'm saying, so that's their explanation. The other view of it is there's two things. There's things they're trying to sort out staff-wise. He's back contingent upon X, Y, and Z happening. Can you land this coordinator? Can you make this change? And as we talked about on Friday's show, from a leverage perspective, right, that Nick probably doesn't have the same leg to stand on that you might think someone with his record had. They collapsed here at the end of the year.
It could be like he came in on day one of the meeting and said, "This is my plan for the staff," and Jeffrey said, "That's not good enough. Come back with a better plan," something like that. Like,
or they're working.
I want to make this work, but like that's not going to be good enough for me.
Or we need to see if we can get this guy. Right. And then the really kind of skeptical, I don't know if it's conspiracy theorist part of it, is Nick's the best option unless you can land somebody else. So you're not going to fire Nick because you believe in him, you think he's a good coach, you like him personally, but if you can get candidate X, Bill Belichick, let's say, right? So you kind of keep it hanging in the wind while you explore your other avenues. So that would be the skeptical conspiracy theorist part of it. Of those three things, I would say number 2 is probably the most likely option here. Number 1, look, it's true. You don't need to announce the guy's coming back, but if it's that simple,
they can't do anything normally ever, ever. Just be normal.
Yeah. So I would counter. This isn't defending the Eagles. I always say, what is normal, right? Normal's not.
Normal doesn't get to the Super Bowl 2 times in 5 years.
But I do think there's a conventional way of operating that you don't need to be unconventional about retaining your coach, right? You could be conventional about that. Like, save your unconventional things for an offense that's creative or something of that nature.
It makes them look either dramatic or indecisive.
And I think neither one is, to use Fletcher Cox's expression, the steady hand.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way,
now it's very reasonable to think that Jeffrey is the one who is being the steady hand here, and he is deciding not to move on from Nick impulsively, even though what we saw over the last 2 months of the season would certainly call for that. And he is deliberately going through the process of saying, we're going to fix this staff. Last year we had to rebuild the staff late in the cycle, and so it's not like we were going to get our top choices. Now we have a chance to fill the staff. Like, this is an opportunity for us to build a very strong staff moving forward with you as the top, but we're going to surround you. Like, let's take our time and do this. That is all possible, but it could still mean you're telling people that Nick is coming back. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And the question is whether you think patience, I don't even know if I would frame it as patience, whether due diligence, if there is a public demand or public responsibility, not to be hasty here, but like to project. This is a front facing organization. It's a front facing business, right? Things aren't done necessarily in the darkness here. I've heard and I've written about this, that one thing that the Eagles will say, and they are correct, in a coaching searches, sometimes there's this public demand to do things quickly, but what like high level search really gets done in 2-3 weeks, it's almost foolish to expect that. The flip side to that is professional football is a unique business here, right? You don't go 3-4 months without having a coach or something in place. So if you think that there's to your fan base, there's a responsibility to have like some type of communication after the season, other than putting out all these players the day after because they're responsible, kind of explaining what happened here. I mean, Howie Roseman hasn't spoken to this roster he put together, right? Nick Sirianni hasn't spoken to this collapse that happened. Even Jeffrey Lurie.
Well, Sirianni's had a chance to speak to it,
but I'm saying like to wrap things up kind of after the season. So no, I also think from a the Eagles always talk about competitive advantage and that kind of thing. From a competitive advantage perspective, you're trying to hire real good coaches here. You want to seem like a stable situation for them to come into. You don't want it to be like a hot seat, to use the phrasing that Jeffrey Lurie used when they dismissed Doug Peterson in January 2021, that Doug would need to maximize on that season, and the team was thinking, more long term. So there's a difference in vision. Now, I think the time frame, the competitive timelines coincide here, right? Nick Sirianni would need to win next year. The Eagles want to win next year. Like there's an expectation that they're a championship level team. But if you're hiring a coach who has options, going to a situation where the coach might seem to be on the hot seat going into that year might not be as desirable. So you want to project this idea of stability, of confidence in the coaching staff and the plan, and all of that can be overstated. I get that, but that is something you need to keep in mind.
All right, Zach, before we get to Ron Rivera and Brian Johnson, let's talk about Rocket Money. You know about Rocket Money. We got a text from, let's call him Keel Shapadia, who was letting Zach and I know that he pulled the trigger on Rocket Money and it saved him a lot of money. What did he say? Let me pull it up, Zach. I think it's okay that this is on the record. He said canceled 10 things and he's having them renegotiate his Verizon bill. What a productive thing for him to do.
Yep.
Rocket Money, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your Belichicks. I can see all of my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something I don't want, I can cancel it with just a tap. I never have to get on the phone with customer service, and they will even try to get you a refund for the last couple of months of wasted money and negotiate to lower your bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $720 a year, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/PHLY. That's rocketmoney.com/PHLY, rocketmoney.com/PHLY.
And while that text was coming in from, are we calling him Shield or are we saying Keel? Whoever it is.
No idea who you're talking about.
Okay. I actually didn't respond, and it wasn't because I was driving. It was because I was actually in the Game Time app at that point, purchasing tickets for yesterday's Flyers game. I took my son Reed to the Flyers game. We were talking about the chance to go to a game. I didn't know if I'd be home yesterday or not. The Eagles lost. That came open. And I do this ad read every week for the past 5 months here. And I know that I don't need to buy it weeks in advance. I can wait for the last minute. And I waited for the last hour. We actually got it right on our way to the game.
While you were driving?
No, when we were in the parking lot, we purchased it. When we were in the parking lot. And I did it. We got good seats at a decent price to watch.
Wow. Feels like you didn't get a steal.
But it's not Game Time's fault, right? Game Time did a great job here in terms of it was so easy to use. I can't talk enough about how great this process was because it certainly was not stressful. And buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets. And I used one of those killer deals, by the way. It was actually a flash deal because they have their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Flash deals on last-minute tickets. Easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. And I need to point this out. I turned to Reed in the car, and I said, do you want this seat view or this seat view? Because we were deciding between two. And the reason I bring that up is they have images of your seat view. You can get the image of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds. It was 2 taps. That's all it was. Tickets, and then it was sent directly to my phone. I didn't have to dig through my email to get it. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code PHLY for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem code PHLY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
A couple super chats to get to that I can read here from Gavin. He says, starting out, how to write for an untalented team. I'm not sure what that's referring to, unfortunately. We'll have to track back on that one, Gavin. Sorry.
Maybe the book about Jeffrey? I don't think so. I mean, if they've been a talented team. I'm not sure
think
what
it
he
was too
to.
recently in the episode for it to be
Gotcha.
referencing that as his reference point. But who knows?
Yeah, they're an awfully talented
Feel free
team.
to explain it. Chris also says, Bo and Zach are the GOATs of Eagles coverage. Salute from Chicago. Salute to you, Chris.
I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you.
All right, Zach, who do you got winning the Women's Australian Open?
I don't even know a single player in the Women's Australian
Not a single
Open.
player.
Not a single player. I'm not a tennis guy, number one, and haven't been following there's so much going on in sports right now.
You don't know Coco Gauff?
Oh, I do know Coco Gauff, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't know she was still playing.
Still playing?
Yeah.
She's like 18 years old.
No,
or something
I'm
like
saying
that.
still playing in the Australian Open.
Okay.
Like, how far along are they?
Oh, yes, they're in the quarters.
Yeah, that's
There's
what I'm saying.
8 left.
I didn't know she was still alive in the quarters here.
Got it.
Is my point.
Okay.
I know she's still playing. Yes. I also know the Pagola's daughter. She plays.
That one I am surprised. I'm not surprised that you know.
Yeah.
That would be the only one that I would expect you to know. She lost early.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay.
First or second. I think second round.
Okay. Yeah, I know she plays.
Yes.
Who do you have winning it?
Sabalenka seems like she's going to take it down, but I'm rooting for Qinwen Zhang.
Gotcha. So
She's on my team.
Let's just unpack this real quick. If the Australian Women's Open is on,
yeah,
and let's take off playoff football because we all know playoff football is on, or you're watching playoff football. But the Australian Open's on, a great NBA game, or even just a middle of the pack NBA game. I was watching, let's say Nuggets Warriors are on. I'm sorry, not Nuggets Warriors. Nuggets Wizards are on. Okay, Flyers Senators are on. Villanova UConn is on, although that was Saturday night. And then Sixers Hornets. Which one are you watching?
Well, timing wise, that doesn't always add
If
up.
all of them were at the same
but
time.
easily the tennis.
Really?
I haven't watched a non-Sixers basketball game all year long.
Oh, I got League Pass.
Yeah, good for you.
I'm watching all those games. Yeah.
I just I'll
Really?
watch it. I'll
Are
watch
you
it
not
in the
into it?
playoffs. I don't.
You're not into it this time of year, or
No.
it just doesn't do it for you?
It doesn't do it for me.
Interesting.
If I'm working late at night and there's nothing else on, I'll put it on the TV, but I'm not going to be sitting there and watching it closely.
And look, different. That's why Baskin Robbins says 31 flavors, right? Because
That's precisely why.
I don't watch the Australian Open, and you don't watch January NBA, but love January NBA, college hoops. Watch that still.
Big game tonight.
Wake.
Deeks at Carolina.
Does it make you nostalgic?
That doesn't make me nostalgic. I hope they make the tournament this year.
What would your day be like? What would your Monday be like before a big Wake Forest?
It would just be all I was thinking about.
Gotcha. Were you there in 2008, 2009?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a great year.
No, January 2009. You were there, or did you
Yes.
graduate the year before?
No. I graduated in 08
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that year.
when they were number one in the country and then lost in the first round to Cleveland State.
Okay. Yeah. That's
No,
the year.
that was the year after I graduated.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. So I remember this well because it was the day of the inauguration in D.C. And I was the
You
only
went
one.
to protest.
What's that? This was when President Obama was
Yeah, I know.
being
I'm familiar with the
inaugurated.
timeline
Okay.
of recent
And
presidents.
I was the only one probably going south that day, right? Because I had to go cover Virginia Tech versus Wake Forest when Wake Forest had just been number 1, and Virginia Tech upset them. Jeff Allen had a big game that night.
I sort of remember that game a little bit.
Yeah, it was the day of inauguration, and I was in Winston-Salem, so I left the DC area to go to Winston-Salem.
I think we've talked about this before. I would rather, like, the degree to which I care about Wake Forest basketball versus Wake Forest football.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would rather a season in which the basketball team lost in the second round of the tournament than a football season in which they went undefeated and, like, lost in the playoff or something like that.
The Riley Skinner era didn't do it for you?
I mean, it was fun. Certainly, the posing was memorable, but yeah, basketball just matters so much more to me.
Yeah, those are good Wake Forest teams. I remember.
Curious to know the percentage of our listenership who is familiar with Riley Skinner's posing.
I remember speaking to Dino Gaudio quite a bit back then.
About Riley Skinner?
No, I know about Wake Forest basketball.
Anyway.
Please don't Google this, by the way.
Please do. Treat yourself. Okay, Ron Rivera, Zach. Now,
yes.
Diana Rossini yesterday reporting that the Eagles had been making calls on defensive coordinator candidates. She mentioned Ryan Nielsen from the Falcons, who had 1 year with them after coming over from the Saints, and Wink Martindale, who we talked about. And then today, Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reporting that the Eagles are set to interview Ron Rivera. Now, on allphly.com, you can read my sort of rundown of the 18 people who I think are going to be on the Eagles' radar to some degree. We talked about the buckets last week. There are the experienced head coaches who can just sort of take over the defense. Nick doesn't have to worry about that at all. There are sort of the in the ecosystem defensive coordinator guys like Martindale and Nielsen, and then there are the guys who you could take a shot on and think this is the next big thing, defensive coordinator. I am of the opinion that if the Eagles are keeping Nick Sirianni, which it seems like they are going to do, what makes sense to me is on the defensive side of the ball, hiring one of those old heads, if you will, someone who can just take over the defense, bring it some professionalism, some competency, and allow Nick Sirianni to focus on the offense and not worry about having to meddle in the defense, having to worry about whether he can trust that side of the ball. On offense, I think they should go the other way. I think what they need on offense is not the Frank Reich type. I think it is somebody who can bring fresh eyes and like a new way of looking at things. Like a Liam Cohen type, right, from Kentucky. But and so Rivera is interesting to me. I prefer Leslie Frazier. I think the track record's better. I think he has run a defense more recently. But Rivera is certainly of that ilk. It has been a while since he has been a defensive coordinator, not since 2010.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also want to pump you up. You mentioned that piece. Definitely check that out because I thought it was a really good breakdown of the candidates and the types of candidates. I think the big name, former head coach, now defensive coordinator, probably makes sense in terms of where they're going. One could say, wasn't that what Matt Patricia was? And I suppose so, but you're hiring a person, not just a type here. And Leslie Frazier would make a lot of sense to me. He's been a defensive coordinator more recently. He's obviously been a head coach, knows the organization. I think that his background in that McDermott scheme is interesting, but he's also worked under Marvin Lewis, right? He's worked with
Jim Johnson.
Yeah, well, yeah, he obviously worked with Jim Johnson, but I'm saying since then.
Yeah. Right?
So there's different components there.
I like the story that his statistics in that article paint. They were very good defenses. They consistently sort of outperformed their success rate. He was never like super blitz heavy or not blitz heavy. Yep. He was always sort of in the middle. And I think, like, when you think of Leslie Frazier, you think of sort of a steadiness, which is, I think, exactly what they need.
Yeah, and in Ron Rivera's case, like I have a lot of respect for Ron Rivera, and Jeffrey Lurie knows him well. Jeffrey Lurie he said in 2020 that Ron Rivera's like family.
What was the length of time between the reporting that the Eagles are interviewing Ron Rivera and you knowing that you had that quote ready to go?
Well, that's right away, right? Like I know Ron Rivera's connection to Jeffrey Lurie. I was there when Jeffrey Lurie said it, and I've been on a number of conference calls with Ron Rivera over the years when he was in Carolina, then he was in Washington, where the question invariably comes up about Philadelphia's time with the Eagles, and he talks about the Lurie family. He talks about his time here, how much he liked it. So yeah, that's not even a flex. That's just part of covering the team, right?
I think that's a bit of
No, I remember conversations we had 5 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever it may be.
Well, sure, but I'm just saying.
I remember conversations.
Pulled the quick
I remember,
trigger.
I remember conversations I had with Julia 20 years ago.
Yeah, she does not.
Wow, that hurts. I remember conversations I had with Julia 25 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, I've known Julia now for 27 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So
what was the first conversation you had?
I mean, I remember we were in the same 5th grade class together. So it was when we met in 5th grade.
Okay. Who was the teacher?
Hey, do we want to get into this? I can tell you the teacher. I can tell you everyone in the class. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole on
Who was the teacher? Was it a good teacher?
Yeah. I really liked him.
Well, you don't want to give his name out? We're worried here? Jeez, guys, a guy not memorable enough to get a shout out.
Yeah. So, anyways,
this is like the honeymoon in Asia. What is this? One of your passwords? Who was your 5th grade teacher? Is that the problem?
No. That's not what it is. Anyways, as I was saying, so Ron Rivera has a strong background with, he has a background with the Eagles. It's been a long time since he's called a defense. Now, when he was in Carolina, when he was in Washington, there was, he's obviously the head coach. He's overseeing a defense there. But I think Leslie Frazier makes more sense there. I found that the two names that Diana put out, like Wink Martindale, I've always been impressed with his groups. Now you mentioned on Friday's show that it might not make sense, like personnel-wise.
I don't think it makes sense in any way.
Okay.
Honestly.
And then,
like, he's a combative personality. This has been proven over and over again. I don't think they need that dynamic. Like, his all or nothing defensive philosophy is interesting and it's fun to watch. It hasn't really gotten great results, and like, it is not the way that the Eagles think about football philosophically. Like, they don't want that on defense. I don't think. Certainly, I don't think Sirianni wants it. I know that Howie Roseman doesn't want it, and so yeah, I would be shocked if he is the hire.
Yeah. Unless they were so like blown away by what the blitz did to them that all of a sudden they're like, we need the blitz on our team.
Unless they truly have never heard of the concept of a blitz until now.
Yeah, the overcorrection.
Like, there's a guy who knows how to blitz.
So Ryan Nielsen interests me in the sense that he has his expertise, his background is in defensive line play, right? Yeah, he played defensive line. When you look at this Eagles roster, you don't know what a lot of that secondary is going to look like, but you know what this defensive front is going to look like. Assuming Hassan Reddick's back and there's some contract things that they need to figure out there, but he is under contract. You know you're going to have Reddick, Sweat, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, presumably, right? So Nolan Smith. So you want to, and these are players you have major investments in. You want to maximize them. That's where Ryan Nielsen's made his hay in the NFL. And he has a really good reputation. Also, I believe he was an Eagles camp body in 2002.
That's right.
Yes. So
didn't make it out of camp, but yes.
Didn't make it out of camp, but I'm sure Reuben Frank can ask him about that summer in Lehigh.
There you go. Anybody else jump out to you?
Well, those are the guys who've been mentioned.
Yes.
I do know that, and I said this in our mock meeting last week, and then in our show on Friday. If you're going for the up and coming guy, then Al Harris is someone who I know the Eagles have a lot, like inside that building. They have respect for what he's done in Dallas and Kansas City, and he's kind of on the verge of becoming a coordinator. So that would be the up and coming type. But as we mentioned, we don't know if we're going to go if they're going to go in that direction. Brandon Staley, I knew that was going to be your reaction, and you had a funny line in there about the Division III thing. Brandon Staley was a really successful coordinator 3 years ago with the Rams.
For 1 year.
For 1 year, yes. Philosophically, looks at the game similar to what Sirianni wants from his defenses. I mean, him and Gannon were close. If you say they need to get back to what they were 2 years ago, then that would make sense. As I wrote in my piece today, I'm not trying to be like a Denard Wilson shill here, but Denard Wilson was there ready for promotion last year, and you could have had continuity. And if it didn't work, then you could say, all right, we're looking for someone outside the building. It just struck me so odd that you bypassed an internal candidate when you had the promotion on offense, but you wanted the defense to change at that point, or the defense to look a little different, and then you abandoned that idea after 13 games. So Denard Wilson, I've mentioned him as someone who's worked for different people, is respected by members of that defense. You don't know who's going to be back and who's not.
Don't you think that ship has sailed, though?
Yes, I do. I'm just saying in terms of candidates that I would like, right? I do think that ship has sailed. So honestly,
I think if he doesn't get hired as a head coach and not retained in Carolina, I think Ejiro Evero would be like the top of the list for me,
Sure.
along with Leslie Frazier. He does not have the the gravitas necessarily of those guys, but I think he has proven enough that you could sort of hand the reins over to him and not have to worry about it too much.
And then we're waiting to see what happens in Miami with Vic Fangio too, because that could be an option. But no, I agree with Ejiro Evero, and we need to see some other things that could happen. There can always be there could be unexpected changes that occur here, but. No, I think Leslie Frazier would make sense.
If they are doing this with Nick and bringing in a Rivera type, I think part of the deal is that they know that they need to restock the whole cupboard of the coaching staff, not just the coordinator, but they're gonna look to replenish pretty much at most every level of the position coaches.
Now, let me ask you this: if you hire that type of candidate who has head coaching experience, who has that gravitas in the league, does that create an unneeded shadow over Nick as a potential interim coach, or as someone who he's not necessarily he's not working for Nick, he's working for Howie and Jeffrey at that point, right?
I don't know. Did that affect Doug Peterson when they brought in Jim Schwartz?
Well, it's a good question. I do think that there was a period of time there where there was that big thought in the building where like Jim's kind of ready to be the head coach, and Jeffrey and Jim are close, and Howie and Jim are close. Now, it worked out really well in 2017. They won a Super Bowl, right? But yeah, I mean, we had reporting on this that there was kind of a thought in the building at some point that Schwartz was in line to take over there.
Yeah, I also think. So what? Like Nick hasn't deserved. Like this is the result of it not working very well in 2023, right? Like
fair.
You gotta do what you gotta do. All right. Before we get to the Brian Johnson reporting from Derek Gunn, let's talk about Bagels & Co. Brooklyn-style bagels made in Philly. We're talking huge bagels, the biggest bagels in Philly. These bagels are the size of the City Hall. Okay, not really.
Which is that way.
Wrong. How could you still get this wrong?
That was a joke. I did that as a joke.
I don't think that was a joke.
That was a joke. That was a joke.
No, it wasn't.
That was a
Come
joke.
clean.
That was.
You were
joke.
laughing because you know that was not a joke.
That was a joke. I was in the building sitting over there. It is that way. That's why I was sitting there with a view of City Hall.
Nobody believes you. They've also got the largest cream cheese variety from cows from over there. I don't know. 30 different flavors of cream cheese, schmears, and all that good stuff. They've got different flavors, seasonal flavors. For instance, they had an Eagles cream cheese, and they do a 76ers cream cheese as well. These are affordable bagels. It's an affordable brand because you get a lot of food for cheap, and in today's inflationary world, they think that's key. They've talked about, raising prices, make a little extra money. No, this is a common person's bagel, okay? They've got a mom and pop feel, and they cater to the everyday individual. There's nothing wrong with that. Bagels & Co., baby. For the best Brooklyn-style bagels made right here in Philly, head to www.thebagelsandco.com/store-locator to find the closest Bagels & Co. near you.
I was watching Friday's show over again, and I liked our backdrops, but there's some things missing in our backdrops, and those are what's behind us here in the studio. And a lot of this we got from FOCO. FOCO is a leading manufacturer of sports and entertainment merchandise with a product line that includes apparel, accessories, toys, collectibles, novelty items, and more. It's the best officially licensed gear for all sports and fandoms. If you're going to a basketball or hockey game, show off your love with team-branded friendship bracelets. There's also hoodies and jackets and beachwear, even overalls. There is something for fans for almost every occasion. FOCO has hooked PHLY up and provided awesome pieces for our set. As you can see, FOCO also has our back for Philly sports, and they have yours too. Get the best gear around by using the link in our description for all non-presale items. Use the promo code PHLY10 for 10% off.
All right, Zach. Derek Gunn
The man.
tweeted earlier today. All indications are Brian Johnson will not be returning as the Eagles OC. He will land elsewhere in some offensive capacity. Not a done deal. But what do you make of that? Let's just assume that it's right because Gunn doesn't tweet out things that are baseless.
Yeah, so it surprises me in the sense that I know inside the building, I'm
a little bit surprised.
Yeah, so it surprised me. They like Brian Johnson. He's an up-and-coming coach. He was considered a big hire when they hired him. He wasn't Nick's hire. I'll point that out. Nick didn't know him before he met Brian Johnson, but he's someone who was ascending here. Has interviewed in Atlanta and Tennessee. Was supposed to interview in Carolina. Carolina's moved on
For head coaching opportunities.
Yes, for head coaching opportunities. Last year, he could have had his pick for offensive coordinator jobs. He chose to stay in Philly. He has that background with Jalen Hurts. There was a school of thought, or not even a school of thought. There was an opinion that Brian Johnson was kind of hamstrung to or restrained to a certain degree, working or not calling his offense. That this is Nick Sirianni's offense. Nick Sirianni might have had a heavy hand in terms of the game plan and the play calling. So that does surprise me some. But then again, Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network, who's also really good, put out Jim Bob Cooter's name over the weekend. And it was brought up as a potential replacement for Brian Johnson if Johnson gets a head coaching job. I think that's kind of how it was framed. That said, Brian Johnson's in the mix for two jobs where it's very competitive, right? I don't know if he'd be considered the front runner for either of those places. So the fact that those discussions are being had about Jim Bob Cooter makes you think that there's also either there's thoughts of changing this offense or shifting this offense, and so that does surprise me some.
A couple things.
Mm-hmm.
One, I am. The fact that Brian Johnson is still in the mix for head coaching opportunities, the Eagles are not going to fire him
exactly.
And because if he gets hired, they get a compensatory pick
too.
Right, they're not going to do that.
And valuable picks too.
Right. So they're not going to be silly.
And it's also a feather in their cap in addition to the
right.
Yeah.
But if they're getting indications that he's no longer on the list and they want to move on, I think that's interesting. There's no doubt that something between the triumvirate of Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, and Brian Johnson was not cooking this season, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I would be a little bit concerned about the relationship between Sirianni and Hurts, which we feel like is not perfect at the moment. And if Brian Johnson is made the fall guy, I don't know. How's Jalen Hurts going to feel about that?
Well, I wish I knew more from Jalen. I mean,
You don't know
perhaps
what you don't
Jalen
know.
was disappointed in the play calling, right, as opposed to the offensive approach. But yeah, they do have a long history together, and Brian Johnson was his quarterback's coach. I get that. I think that things always evolve in relationships too. So I don't know the answer to that.
I thought they might lean into the second year with a signal
Yes.
caller again.
And look, and I know Brian. This might not be popular to say on the chat or in this market right now, and I still get killed for defending Gannon. I think Brian Johnson's a sharp guy, and I think Brian Johnson's a good coach who.
I don't think that Brian Johnson was the problem with the offense.
Yes, I agree with you there. And so I I thought they would keep Brian Johnson and they would have that senior offensive assistant. Now we can get into the Jim Bob Cooter conversation. If the idea here is
If Nick walked into Jeffrey's office and wrote the name Jim Bob Cooter on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk, like I can deliver Jim Bob, then like okay, we need to totally clean house here because that is not a good enough idea.
well, the Jim Bob jokes aside, I think this speaks to a larger thing. I think the Jim Bob Cooter idea is Nick is Nick saying this is my offense, and like that this push pull here was Brian Johnson was not, Brian Johnson has his way of calling things, his way of approaching things. I like Brian.
Remind the listeners what Jim Bob's background is with the Eagles.
Yeah, so Jim Bob Cooter was on the Eagles staff in 2021, Nick's first year, and
Which was like unreported for a while
Yes.
until Nick let it slip that he was the guy in charge of game day.
of
Like,
game management
yeah.
stuff. But him and Nick have a background together. I think they worked in Kansas City together. Okay, so there's that background. Then Jim Bob Cooter went to Jacksonville to work on Peterson's staff, and then he went to Indianapolis last year as the offensive coordinator.
So how would this work?
Well, he can only come to Philly if he's calling plays.
Even if he's under contract and it's technically a lateral move, he can leave?
I think the play calling
Or
would
do they
allow.
have to let him leave?
I think play calling because it's considered greater responsibilities.
Okay.
Maybe not in title. I don't know, but I think he would have to call plays, or maybe they would just be like a gentleman's agreement with Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen calls the plays with the Colts. But yeah, this would strike me as Nick saying, I'm doubling down on my offense. I'm doubling down on my offensive philosophy. That there might have been incongruencies in terms of the play calling and the offensive philosophy here. Now, I would kind of say maybe we know Nick's guy's Kevin Patullo. And if he said, I just want Kevin Patullo to be the play caller, that could be met with the fan base almost like a Press Taylor situation. Like Doug saying, all right, yeah, we're going to fix this by making Press Taylor in charge, right? So maybe that's not the option. So Jim Bob, and they think that there's some of that Colts charm and that Jim Bob, worked well.
Colts charm?
Look, there's a lot of Eagles fans who say that Shane Steichen might have been the key here, right? Similar to how Frank Reich was always viewed as the key in the Peterson era. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I actually like what you presented, which is finding like an up and coming offensive mind. But I think more of the question here is not the person in charge of the offense, but whether this is going to be Nick's offense or this is going to be someone else's offense. As it stands now, this is Nick's offense. And I think any type of, I don't call it power struggle, but discussion there would be whether Nick can put his imprint more on the offense, or if they want Nick to cede offensive philosophy control.
Yeah, I think like philosophically, if I was to say what the problem with the 2023 Eagles offense was, like the reason they underperformed, it would be that everything was too stubborn, right? Like they refused to adapt. They kept trying to just do what they did and execute it well. They were incredibly predictable, and that ran out. And so if the solution to that from Nick Sirianni's perspective is to like triple down on just doing what we do and doing it even better and hiring the guys I know who can help me do this, I think that would be a red flag.
So my pushback, and I don't disagree with you, but my pushback would be adding someone else's offense. How's that different than bringing in Scangarello? And it's like Jeffrey saying, I'm enamored by the 49ers, so Doug run this offense here or have this guy put it in. Like if Nick's your coach, then you're signing up for Nick's offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably want to avoid the arranged marriages.
Yes.
When there are Doug didn't really want Scangarello there. You don't want to bring in a guy who Nick doesn't want there.
Exactly.
But I would be disappointed from Lurie's perspective that Nick is not intellectually curious enough about changing the offense and examining the way that he can do things differently instead of just trying to get back to basics and find someone who can help him do what he does better.
And then the counter to that would be Nick saying, I did this last year with Matt Patricia, right? You told me to bring in Patricia, and I brought in Patricia, and then this happened, right? So I hear you. I think the offense does need more creativity, especially when you watch some of these games this weekend and you see how scheme played a role here and what they did to scheme guys open and make it easier for their quarterback. And that did not seem the case for much of the Eagles season. Real quick, by the way,
sure.
Adam Schefter is reporting that the Jaguars are set to hire Ryan Nielsen as their new defensive coordinator. So you can take Nielsen off the board.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense.
And also there have been reports or...
Now, I didn't mention Mike Caldwell as a defensive coordinator possibility, but I imagine that he might be a guy who is on the Eagles' radar as maybe a position coach.
Bring him back as linebackers coach, that there was some talk about Wink Martindale being a candidate in Jacksonville. So if Jacksonville's going with Nielsen, then Wink Martindale's still out there.
I mean, I will be. I don't know. I'll do a show in French if the Eagles hire Wink Martindale or something.
I don't mean to pivot this back to the defense because we're on the offense. Can I ask you a quick defense question?
Please.
We didn't discuss this, and this was in your piece today. What do you think of the idea at the college coordinator? Or do you think that was a last year idea, not a this year idea?
I am not entirely opposed to it. If it was Glenn Schumann, that would make me shudder a little bit.
Just trying to bring Georgia.
Yeah, like they were just trying to lean into this bit fully.
Yeah.
But I feel like Jesse Minter, you can talk yourself into the Mike McDonald path a little bit. There is, it's not like Jim Harbaugh was managing that defense with a heavy hand, right? Presumably he had autonomy there. And so I would be intrigued by Jesse Minter of those choices, but I don't think it's the way that they're going to go.
Speaking of which,
and they interviewed him last year.
Yes, Jim Harbaugh is meeting for a second time with the Chargers this week, according to Schefter. So maybe Minter follows Harbaugh to wherever he goes.
Right. Any thoughts from the weekend of football that are semi-Eagles related?
I mean, I would have loved to be covering a game because there's very few places in this world that I enjoy more than sitting in a press box for a big game. But it was fun watching those. I admit that. That Bills-Chiefs game yesterday was entertaining. The Bills, man, so Sean McDermott, who I think is a really good coach, but 7 years, 1 championship game appearance. They can't seem to get over this hump. And they had winnable games. Yesterday was a winnable game, and they didn't get through. Do you think McDermott, if you were in charge in Buffalo, do you keep on with McDermott, or do you say...
I think I probably do.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't have a great answer. I mean, what are you going to do instead?
Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, great.
Bring him back to Western New York. Yeah.
My takeaway from that is, Patrick Mahomes is probably the best quarterback who's ever lived, right? And it is impossible to discount that. But in the context of the collapse that we saw the Eagles have this year and how hard it is to keep everybody pulling in the same direction year after year, it's so impressive that the Chiefs are able to do this. What is it? 6, 7 AFC championship games in a row?
6. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Patrick Mahomes has never not made the championship game as a starter. Think
insane.
about that. Now, another thing too here, from an Eagles perspective, did you watch that game and think the Eagles beat both these teams on back-to-back weeks 2 months ago? I know 2 months is a long time in the NFL, but the Eagles beat both of them in really impressive ways, right? With good performances.
What an unbelievable defensive performance in the second half against the Chiefs.
Yes. And then And then all of a sudden, by the way, you pulled in and all of a sudden last week when you were imitating me, and I listened back to the show and I said, I missed in the time. Good work.
Okay.
Was that intentional?
Probably.
Okay.
I don't even remember it, but if I was imitating you, then I probably did it on purpose. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that jumped out. The Detroit game. I mean, I don't want to jump on like the whole Dan Campbell, or the whole like Ben Johnson love fest, but I thought that offense looked really sharp. I think that I give a lot of credit, by the way, to Brad Holmes, the general manager. They've drafted just a bunch of like really good football players who you're seeing it. They're drafts that tend to be panned sometimes, and I get like it's not always positional value at its best, but Gibbs is making a big difference here. Right, Sam Laporta. Now, Sam Laporta's fine in the second round, but he's a really good player. They navigated these past few drafts. The Syracuse DB, man, that was a great pass rush that he had. I mean, they've hit on Sewell in a big way, which we both liked Sewell coming out.
I don't think we get credit for that.
I mean that he fell much farther than expected, right? Hutchinson, they hit on Hutchinson, right? It's easy to hit on Hutchinson. I get it.
Tiny arms, though.
But I mean, Brad Holmes is just putting good football players together. And look, Dan Campbell, when we were on Birds with Friends,
it was easy to make fun of. But yeah, he's been a legit change agent for them, culture-wise, and a guy who was not a coordinator, right? And so I don't think you have to limit your search to coordinators.
Yes. And then the games 2 nights ago, what'd you think of those?
That was a bummer from the Packers' perspective. They were the better team in that game.
They outplayed them.
They outplayed them for sure. And the missed field goal, the dropped interceptions. I mean, like this narrative that like Brock Purdy,
Joe Montana,
like give me a break. He was like he was probably the worst quarterback who played this weekend
in terms of performance, without a doubt. Yeah,
and a bad game.
Yeah.
Like he was the reason that they almost lost. Just give me a break with this Brock Purdy stuff. But
it's
like I think they're going to beat the Lions now.
It's like the opposite in baseball. You pray for rain, right? In the playoffs, it's like the opposite. Don't pray. You can't. You better hope it does not rain when he's on the field, because man, there was just some awful plays. But
we have some news, Zach, to close out the show. We have word now that I think that we can say. On Wednesday,
I don't know if we can say.
We are going to hear from Howie Roseman.
Yes. Okay.
And Nick Sirianni. So it is official that Nick Sirianni will be back as the Eagles head coach, unless they decide to fire him in a week.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, the messaging from the NovaCare Complex, the white smoke has come out of Jeffrey Lurie's chimney. Nick Sirianni will return. He has seen his shadow, and he and Howie Roseman will talk on Wednesday. And obviously, we will have you covered for that on PHLY.
This is a great show arc because we started the show talking about when will they speak, what are the rules for them speaking, who will be speaking, and now we complete the show with it's like a movie here, right? You followed along, you followed the arc, and now the payoff comes in the end.
It's more like an episode because it's
an
full hour, real prestige TV going on here on the PHLY YouTube feed. So exciting stuff. We're going to get to talk to Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman. We find out how, I think we should ask Nick how angry Sean Desai was when he called to fire him.
Should we do a mock press conference tomorrow?
Maybe we can think about that.
I always loved I like the press conference more than the meeting thing.
Okay.
So yeah, the mock press conference I enjoyed more than the mock meeting.
No, I thought the mock meeting was fun.
Yeah, the viewers enjoyed it.
Next time we'll switch roles. You can be Jeffrey and I'll be the person trying to save his job.
Yeah, but I can't imagine like the coach being in a bullying situation there too. You'd be like Parcells. You'd be.
Well, who says I have to be the bully?
I think that's your. I mean, I don't mean to unpack this. I think the audience knows between the two of us.
But I can also get myself into a role. I can go method. I mean, come on.
You're like Daniel Day-Lewis over here.
Yeah.
You like that reference?
Got
by
range.
The way. Yeah.
So you can name one tennis player, the daughter of a billionaire, and at least one actor.
Not the daughter of an owner. okay, of an owner.
You dispute that he is a billionaire?
No, I'm saying, I mean, like, I don't know him because he's a billionaire. I know him because he owns the
you
Buffalo
literally
Bills.
do know him because he is a billionaire. He wouldn't be an owner if he weren't a billionaire.
True. Okay. And then I know more actors than Daniel Day-Lewis is the go-to for method acting.
That's good. That's good pull for you.
Yeah, I read an article how on the Lincoln set he stayed in Lincoln the whole time. Yeah.
Okay.
Way to sell that
documentary, of course.
I don't think the audience understands that. Do you want to mention? You can tease me there too. I saw the weekend before training camp this year. I saw Oppenheimer, and I said it was. Bo asked me about it. I said, as a fan of history, I was eating it up, and Bo was like, "You think it's a story?" I don't think it's a documentary, but it's based on history. Yeah, they didn't pick up. They didn't make these characters up out of thin air. They didn't make up this event out of thin air. They didn't make up the.
No, but I mean, they dramatized it all.
Sure. I mean, we dramatized the meeting last week. It didn't mean the meeting.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, and there weren't people watching and said, "Oh, I'm a fan of history. I'm going to watch this."
One day, someone's going to YouTube the Lurie Sirianni meeting, and they're going to think that was an actual report.
All right. So the good news is we got a set schedule for this week, noon every day. Obviously now Wednesday may be up in the air depending on when that press conference is with Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni. But we will keep you up to date. Either way, we will be back tomorrow at noon. Thank you for starting your week with us. And for Julia and Zach, we thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you subscribe to the Die Hard level, there's a good chance you might be able to bully Zach into letting you know the name of his 5th grade teacher. Other than that, we will talk to you tomorrow at noon. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.